The only people for me are the mad ones.
The world is filled with the boring and the barely conscious.
And misery loves company.
But we don't have to live this way.
Jessica and I are here to talk to those the system rejects, to radicals and thought criminals.
The ones who never yawn or say a commonplace thing, but push the boundaries of acceptable discourse.
Those who stare reality in the face and dare it to be different.
History isn't made by the timid, and fun is not had by the perpetually afraid.
We are the mad ones.
So let's get to it.
Welcome to the Mad Ones. I'm your I've already decorated for Christmas and you can't stop me host, Cam Harless. And with me as always is your Why Don't I See a Christmas Tree behind you right now, hostess, Miss Jessica Green.
I have one Christmas tree and it's out in the main part of the house so that you can see it. I don't know if you have been to the South, but our doors all have this like big window over them so you can see into people's houses. I don't know why this is, but I have to position my tree so that you can see it from the road. This is a requirement. So I have one tree over there.
Is it up already or are you slacking?
No. I'm going out of town and for Thanksgiving, so I'm going to put it up after I get back.
Monster.
I got a lot of things to do, man.
All right. Well, I just love Jesus more than you. So, before we get started with the show, which I'm excited about because it's just a lovely guest who everyone loved and mentioned and shared our episode on death last time. Before we get to that, I do want to mention we do have people who help us out by letting us give you promo codes to buy their products. And, first off, I'm disappointed that Jessica hasn't bought one of our mugs yet to show off yet.
I didn't know they were up. I will though.
I told you, I sent you a link, Jessica. But if you want to fill a mug, first off, we do have them. It's in the description. But if you want some good coffee, Run Your Mouth Coffee has some great bourbon barrel aged coffee that I just love. And if you go to their website, rymcoffee.com, and use promo code The Mad Ones, you get 10% off. Likewise, if you like dried meats, Righteous Felon has some great dried meats, some beef jerky, if you will, at their website, righteousfelon.com. And if you use promo code MADONES there, you get 10% off. So beyond that, get on our Patreon, because the people who are watching this right now can only do so because they're patrons. And you could be here with us making comments, doing the thing, but you're not. So you should go ahead and join our Patreon, patreon.com/themadOnes. Beyond that, let's go ahead and bring in our guest tonight, which is it's daytime right now. But tonight we are joined once again by a very lovely lady from across the pond, a PhD in 19th century Gothic literature, a writer, a public speaker, a lover of the paranormal, graveyards, headstones, and spiritualism, the woman behind Burials and Beyond, Dr. Kate Cherrell.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm first very apologetic. I don't have a Christmas tree up. But, in terms of Jesus, I've got a whacking great, where is it? There you are. There's the lad. There's a whacking great cross there. So, I offer that as penance.
I will accept it. Only person who gets shunned is Jessica. So
it's because he hates hobbits and I'm very, very small. So
and that's the thing.
If my people.
If you put up a Christmas tree, you become an elf and you come back into my favor. And that's the only move you need to make.
Oh, dear.
So the last time we talked to Kate, we had an episode about death, which when I told people we were having an episode about death, they were like, why? And I was like, because people don't talk about it and they don't talk about kind of the particulars, how it affects them. Kind of the cultural aspects of it. And then people watched, and we had several people talk about how much they loved hearing you talk about death, hearing us give our little personal anecdotes, and they shared it. Some people were too afraid to watch it, but hey, it was well received except for the scaredy cats. So I'm happy to have you back. And at the end of that episode, we talked about spiritualism briefly, especially Gothic spiritualism Gothic. Am I saying Victorian and Gothic? These are kind of terms you can use.
Big Venn diagram. and
Okay.
spiritualism can kind of just wibble about in the
Okay.
middle.
Gotcha.
Alright.
Well, I want to talk about that. I'm sure Jessica knows more about spiritualism than I do. And so, because she's all kinds of excited about talking about it. And I'm like, I just want to learn. So what is it about spiritualism, especially in that era, because it seemed very prevalent in that time? What drew you to study this, and tell us about it. Tell us why we should be interested in
Wow.
this era.
Well, spiritualism, if I could say it, particularly 19th century spiritualism, I think is one of the few movements. Well, it's a religious movement, but also it was a cultural movement. It was a social movement, and it affected most of the Western world, or at least Europe and the Americas, in a huge way that we haven't really seen since, especially in terms of religious fervor. And it developed so quickly as far as like beliefs and methodologies, and it still continues to influence a lot of what we believe today, even if and a lot of it we don't realize. I think spiritualism affected as much how maybe if you're a Christian, maybe if it has informed so many people's personal relationship with worship and with kind of spiritual religious connections, as much as it's influenced something as silly and mundane as ghost hunting. It was this huge, and politically, huge characters across spiritualism influenced the whole world. So you'll look into, I think spiritualism, like so many things, is like a rabbit warren. So especially in American spiritualism, you can just get so obsessed with individual people in the 19th century. And you'll find, Abraham Lincoln wasn't a particularly signed up Christian, he wasn't Protestant, he wasn't Catholic. He was big into spiritualism, who had his own personal spiritualist called Nettie Coburn Maynard, who was a child medium. And then you think, oh God, mediums could have more political influence. And then you look into other mediums, and like the Comstock profanity laws, they came in because of warring mediums. So there's all this influence, and a lot of gender studies to be had. It's just a huge, fascinating movement that as soon as you think you've scratched the surface, you realize exactly how little you know. And it drew scientists into madness. It brought Martian kings into drawing rooms. It was the most amazing, fascinating movement. And if you like people and studying people, there's no better way to look into mad ones, to mad people. And if you're saying, okay, let's talk about a naked French woman who used to run around the seance room with cardboard cutouts of kings saying that they were, the living dead. I mean, that's a conversation starter and ender all in one. So who couldn't be obsessed with this sort of thing?
When you talk about like individual people to kind of focus on in this territory, I came into studying this because I was studying the Russian Revolution and the role that the death of Rasputin played in sort of like beginning this whole process of the devolution of the Tsar's family. And his wife, who was English, she was German by birth, but she was hand raised by Queen Victoria in that era, became an ardent Orthodox Christian, as many converts do, and then had a sickly son. And so she was very prone to this sort of cultural movement, which suggested that through these, spiritual channels, otherworldly things could interact with our world. And it was after the death of this man, because many who were politically connected through the royal family believed that he was actually influencing the royal family, and in many ways probably was. And his death, honestly, was sort of this trigger that kind of changed the modern world in a lot of ways, especially for people living in what would become the USSR. So my interest in it kind of was vague before that, but then realizing how influential these people were in modern politics is actually something to take note of. The thing about Abraham Lincoln, I didn't know that, but it makes sense because he also had a sickly child that died. And so, there seems to me to be like a lot of grieving parents who might have been taken in, and kind of, still are. There were figures like John Edwards who used to sort of pretend to talk to the dead and things of this nature. I think that there is something to be said about people wanting to connect with their departed ones, and then there are always going to be charlatans ready to take advantage of that, whether you're a political figurehead or not.
Yeah, I think with anything relating to kind of death and comfort, especially if money's being exchanged, you always need to consider comfort, personal development, and enjoyment are all perfectly valid, but there has always been a big element of exploitation, in spiritualism and in modern mediumship, things like that. That's not to say that, I'd never tar everyone and say, there's nothing in this, but certainly, as with any field, there are people who are out for personal gain, and that hasn't been, especially, when you're, looking at people who have, like you say, lost children, who are arguably, the most vulnerable. It's one of the greatest tragedies one could really suffer. And there are so many accounts over the centuries of mediums, I'll use that in inverted commas, learning their craft from someone else, a bit kind of honor among thievesy in certain parts of spiritualism, and then going straight away and finding someone who's recently bereaved, people who aren't foolish. I think there's an element that I think a lot of us still fall into today when it comes to anyone who's maybe been defrauded or romantically defrauded, as you see on a lot of TLC shows that are on late at night. We do look at them and think, oh, how could they be so stupid? They must be the most foolish person in the world, when really these people are of sound mind. They might be high up in authority, they're just grieving. And so we do kind of reach out for the closest thing that will bring us an iota of comfort, and that's always in the way. There's a brilliant book called Behind the Scenes with the Mediums it looks really imposing. It's a doorstop of a book, but it's an easy read. So, and I think it's from 1907, and it's by an American magician called David P. Abbott, who was a magician turned debunker. And when he saw a lot of his stage tricks being just done as he'd always done them, but being told that they were actually they were this amazing mystical power, he went round the country, collected loads of stories, and within those stories there are a lot of instances of there was like a judge, so obviously a very intelligent man whose wife had recently died, and this medium took many sittings with this judge. A lot of money was exchanged, and then, as was quite popular for a time, manifestation mediumship was. So you wouldn't just contact the dead would come into the room, they'd materialize and potter about a bit. I'm paraphrasing, they didn't really potter and do the dusting, but still. And so this judge eventually had the spirit of his deceased fiance come into the seance room and ask for this incredibly hefty diamond ring that was her engagement ring. And so the spirit took away this ring and dematerialized it, shall we say. And although the judge might have felt momentarily comforted by the appearance of his fiancée, who was just a bloke in a sheet, there's definitely a lot to be said for being careful and realizing that exploitation through spiritualism and through spiritual matters is a long and rich tradition, as much as seance and things like that.
So when I was looking into kind of Victorian spiritualism, when we talked about it previously, there was a list of people who were notable in within that within the whole situation, and I actually got confused on it. One of them that was really into it was Arthur Conan Doyle, the writer of Sherlock Holmes.
Yep.
And on the inverse was Charles Dickens, who wrote a book about a man who flew around with spirits. Right, if that's the Christmas Carol, but he was one who was writing articles against spiritualism, and so that was where my confusion lied. Lay.
Lay. I think it's lay.
It's done though, so I don't know. We'll see. It was there. It's laid to rest. It's dead. But my curiosity is, who do you think in that time? I mean, obviously Arthur Conan Doyle is an interesting name within that. Rudyard Kipling, I believe, was also in the mix with that, proponents of the spiritualism. But who do you think is the most interesting people that were into this and what they added to the conversation?
In terms of conversation, as in they weren't mediums, I think Dickens is really interesting, especially this time of year. It's like, let's get all the Dickens out. Let's get all the Christmas Carol and the finest adaptation of all, which of course we all know is the Muppet version.
Absolutely.
So I think Dickens is really interesting because we'd all expect him to be big into spiritualism. He should do. He wrote, as you say, about moralistic spirits. But Dickens was really in with superstition and the supernatural. But there was still this, there wasn't a big line drawn between the two at the time. So he was into the supernatural, but not into the spiritualist.
So like not connecting with them, just
I think
them.
he just dismissed it from the word go. So as much as he'd write and reap success from writing about spirits and traditional Christian morality, in his magazines at the time, he would publish countless articles attacking the spiritualist movement. And again, doing the familiar sort of attack of, these people are credulous, they are so stupid, look at me, I've got all my stuff together. Which really, if you look at Dickens's life, oh no, you didn't, sunshine, you were a bit of a wrong un. But Conan Doyle, this is like no great academic description. Like Dickens, wrong un, Conan Doyle, sad. But Conan Doyle, he suffered a series of tragedies. I think he had a son and a brother die in quite quick succession, and so he went in for spiritualism for kind of grieving purposes. But he's a fascinating man, and he wrote some really brilliant, thorough books on the history of spiritualism that have recently just been republished in really nice editions, affordable editions, because these sort of things, they go for daft money nowadays. But I find him really interesting because he wrote the greatest detective mind ever. And then if you search a handful of relatively well-known Victorian mediums who were very publicly debunked and shown to be fraudulent, if you even just click on their Wikipedia pages, there'll be a bit that says Arthur Conan Doyle investigated so-and-so and found them to be legitimate, and then the next line will be Houdini came in a fortnight later and pulled a sheet up and realized that they had an accordion strapped to their head, that sort of thing. So Conan Doyle I find fascinating and quite tragic in a way, especially because he and Houdini were opposite sides of the coin. They were both investigating mediums, but for very different ends, and they were quite pally until they had quite a big falling out. And I think Conan Doyle's wife took herself to be a bit of a medium towards the end, and with Houdini pretended to channel his mother. And I do say pretended because I do think it was fraudulent. I think she was just giddy and carried away with it all. But Houdini and his mother were incredibly close. I think most books that Houdini wrote, certainly there's one that I've got by my bed at the minute, is dedicated to his beloved mother. They had this intense, really tight relationship. And then suddenly your mate's wife comes round saying, I'm channeling your dead mother.
Good Lord.
And very unconvincingly. And so understandably, there was a lot of fallout from that. And I think most people would kind of react the same today. So I find it quite a shame that Conan Doyle's obsession, and very trusting obsession, kind of brought about the downfall of his own reputation, but also a lot of relationships.
Yeah.
But he was prolific, really prolific in spiritualism. So I find him very interesting. People like William Crookes, who you might be familiar with. He was a Victorian scientist who I often pretend to understand his work, even though it's way above me. But his work, he worked in like a development of something that later led to X-rays. It's all this very complicated stuff that is incredibly dull to me because I am scatterbrain. And he was an incredibly well-respected scientist who also fell into spiritualism. Really interesting man. But again, with spiritualism messing with people's reputations, after his death, he did some very, very high profile investigations with people like Florence Cook, who was a child medium, and some of the Fox sisters. And after his death, to preserve his scientific reputation, his family destroyed most of his studies, his files, his ephemera on spiritualism to try and rewrite his history, which didn't work and has just left us with quite a sad, potted legacy. Whereas really, if we had those documents, if we had some of these original photos, that would be amazing. Be an amazing addition to the world of psychical science and psychical study. But I think that there's countless. I waffle about spiritualism. I just find it so brilliant because there are so many interesting people. Yeah.
What do you think sort of caused the rise of this movement? And what do you think was its eventual downfall, if it had one?
The rise, I suppose spiritualism came about during a time of quite religious fervor, especially in the States. There's a lot of arguments about exactly how spiritualism began, because the precursor to spiritualism was a movement called Mesmerism. And there was a lot of interest in ideas of psychic connection, animal magnetism, this kind of primal sort of proto-telepathy that many scientists, especially in Europe, were very interested in. And in the States at the time, I think the Mormons were just, so Joseph Smith, I'm trying so hard not to be rude about any beliefs, because I know the way I speak can seem so dismissive when actually I'm just like little jolly country bumpkin trying to talk about things. So there was the Shakers were going on. The Mormons were just finding their feet. There was religious tent revivals were, I mean, I know we kind of think of them as like 50s and 60s sort of things. They were huge at this time. And with developments like with with Darwin, and a more Christian Science approach on the horizon, and a rise in secularism, and more questions arising from things like theories of evolution, things like that. A lot of people were crying out for
an escape from materialism,
kind of, but also a kind of reiteration of the legitimacy of Christ's resurrection. That was a big part in 19th century spiritualism, definitely. But also this kind of, mortality rates, especially for children, were so high. But with so many developments happening, you have the telegraph, you have these really huge, big developments. So that seemed completely impossible for centuries. So people were thinking, well, now I can send a message this quickly. Why shouldn't I be able to talk to the dead? Because it seemed to be the age of development, the age of optimism. And a lot of people genuinely believed that through the Industrial Revolution and things like that, that God was bestowing blessings on the 19th century. So a lot of it just seemed like, well, of course, why shouldn't we be able to? So it happened at the right time. And really, the general consensus is that spiritualism as we know it began in 1848 with the Fox sisters, who were trying to do a super duper potted history. They were a family that lived in a farmhouse in Hydesville in Rochester, New York, and the two youngest sisters, Kate and Margaret, who were 11 and 14 at the time. This is super duper potted. The house was troubled by knocks and bangs and things like that. No one could attribute them to anyone living. So the two youngest girls established a system of like call and response knocks and or raps, as we call them, with this spirit. They named this spirit. They identified it as a spirit firstly, and then they called it Mr. Splitfoot, which was an old nickname for the devil.
Not creepy at all.
No, that's fine. It's like, why don't you just call it like Jeff?
Yeah.
But okay, yeah, let's have a chat to
Old
Satan.
Spring Hill Jack.
Yeah. Yeah. And then they started giving public displays quite quickly afterwards at like the local town hall. And they were encouraged by their neighbours who were Quakers. So there's a lot of little religious groups surrounding kind of the inception of spiritualism. So although today, like if you go into most church communities that once nurtured spiritualism, if you mention spirit contact, they'll say, oh no, it's the work of the devil, you know, you don't know what you're dealing with, you're tampering, you know, things like that. Whereas actually spiritualism was really helped along by religious groups because it came along at the right time. And then, yeah, and spiritualism kind of, it's still going today. There are spiritualist churches all over the world still, but it had a resurgence during the First World War, big time, just because, yeah, the casualties obviously were huge, and it was death on a scale that most of that generation had never encountered before. Mm-hmm. So people were crying out for comfort again, and there was a little resurgence during the Second World War as well. So in times of war, you know, it's always the way, but because of constant debunkings and people's claims were getting so grand, and more people were being shown to be fraudulent or exploitative, that's when it kind of faded out. And then the stragglers that we see from kind of mediumship and spiritualist performance mediumship, we kind of only see today as performance mediums like Teresa Caputo, the Long Island medium, and
Miss Cleo.
Well, there you go.
Miss Cleo? I don't know if you ever got those. Okay, so in America, at least, there was a phone. It was essentially like a
psychic phone line.
Number.
Oh, okay.
And these ads were everywhere. If you haven't seen them, you need to Google them. But Miss Cleo was this woman who it was a black lady who was very clearly faking a Jamaican accent.
It was bad.
And she so like throughout my childhood, there'd be jokes about "Call me now,"
yeah,
because that was Miss Cleo. And then there was John Edwards. He was
John Edwards. Yeah,
well.
So he had a television show. The name escapes me at the time, but he would talk to your Crossing Over. Thank you. And I watched that show all the time. It came out when I was a teenager, so I was like, "Ooh, he's talking to the dead." And it turned out they found out that he was hiding microphones in the audience, and so he would hear people saying, "Oh, I hope he contacts my mother. She died of cancer." So on and so forth. So he eventually was debunked himself for doing this, but it was like a ragingly popular show for like a year or two before it got debunked. And for me, that was kind of like the nail in the coffin, so to speak, for my little romp through spiritualism, because I really thought, you know, he was making contact with the spirit world. And I also had a little foray in my teen years into like the ghost hunting thing. Mm-hmm. We had what's called the abandoned insane asylum near us in our town. I live in a little small town in rural Georgia. And what it is, it's like a hospital facility that got shut down in the 70s. And a lot of the things got left inside of it. So there are still like tables and x-rays kind of littered all over the ground. And it's sort of a creepy place for teenagers to go at night and wander through with flashlights and things of this nature. It's a creepy place, don't get me wrong, but there is that, you know, strain of ghost hunting popularity that is still existent today. Those shows are all over the place still. So to me, I feel like the spiritualism movement didn't die, so to speak. It just kind of like changed forms. And so now we have people with like electronic devices going around and like, what are they called? EVPs, where you'll record sound and then you'll enhance it on a computer. And then the person suggests to the audience what is being said. And once you've had it suggested to you what this garbled little piece of audio is saying, you then hear it the same way yourself. So there's a lot of like suggestion going on with that too. But, you know, for teenage girls, it's really easy to fall into that kind of, you want there to be something magical and something special and something otherworldly going on. And so you know, are easily taken in by this sort of thing. But I think that over the years, even like Ghost Hunters, the most popular one of them, Ghost Hunters, has been shown multiple times to be faking things and doing sort of like shady. They pretend that they're not. I don't know how they're still popular though, because they've been debunked so many times. But I think there is. I think it's still here. I think it still exists. It's just much more, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, it's more of a circus act now.
Yeah.
Like the flea circus. Like, oh, I see the fleas. I see the fleas. You know, it's machinery underneath doing it. But in your heart, you want to think I see the fleas. They're really there.
Yeah. I think there's always, sorry.
No, I was just saying, it makes me think of that meme, the little video, I think it was from BuzzFeed, where the guy is walking into a ghost encounter and he goes, "Hey there, demons, it's me, your boy." And that plays in my head.
I love that so much. I have it on a little badge.
Yeah.
I have on my rucksack because I'm a real cool kid. It's "Hey there, demons, it's me, your boy."
I've got the one every November 1st I post it because I love it. He says, "Bye ghosts, I love you." And it's like you go from the Halloween season into the holiday season. It says, "Bye ghosts, I love you."
Oh, that's brilliant.
One of the things I came across, there were a couple of quotes from kind of big opponents of spiritualism, which one of them was Alfred Lord Tennyson, the poet. And I just love these two quotes are just so I like how they put these words together. Alfred Lord Tennyson said, "I'm convinced that God and the ghosts of men would choose something other than mere table legs through which to speak to the heart of man."
Yeah.
And then this other one, I don't know who Anthony Trollope is, but he wrote, "When tables rap and boards right and dead young women come and tickle my knee under a big table, I find the manifestations to be unworthy of the previous grand ceremony of death."
I mean, they're good quotes, but also,
good quote.
Who doesn't want to play with a board and have a young woman tickle their knee under the table? That sounds like an amazing night out, and that is why ghost hunting remains popular. I rest my case.
Right.
Well, it's like, so you said it really started in 48?
Yeah. If we take it from the Fox sisters, then we're talking 1848.
Okay, because it's like when I think of spiritualism, I of course then go to the darker side of things where people went into the occult, really occultism, separate but very tied together. Aleister Crowley, I believe he was born in the late 1800s, and was he Order of the Golden Dawn?
Yeah,
I forget. Yeah, but he seems like he would be very much a product of spiritualism. Would you think that that's the case, or?
Kind of. I think he went more in. I'm by no means an expert on Crowley's, someone that I really should read more on. But I think he fell more in with Theosophy to begin with, which in itself was an offshoot from spiritualism, because that was Madame Blavatsky. But he was really into. I'm going to keep it PG, but he was really into sex magic, which is obviously a form of spiritualism, I suppose. But within sex magic, there were some enormous figures of spiritualism in there, like Pascal Beverly Randolph, who was a mixed race medium in the 19th century. He was an abolitionist. He was an abolitionist and sex magician. Immediately go out and buy his autobiography. It's amazing. But I think Crowley was more driven by nihilism and kind of self-determination in a way, whereas a lot of spiritualists were happy to exist within these like preformed parameters of their place in the wider world, and that was God's world, rather than Crowley, who was just kind of obviously do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Yeah.
You know, so I think he's more sort of skirting around the edge of spiritualism, I think, but I find he's a very interesting man.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Madame Blavatsky, who you don't hear a lot about, like in the wider world. You very rarely hear about this, but she was her writing was also, if I'm remembering correctly, part of what Hitler used in understanding like the Aryan race and why
bring that up.
he brought that into his worldview, which led to what happened in World War II.
Yeah.
Which I don't fully understand her views because I haven't dived into them very deeply. But
no, I'm not too hot on theosophy, but I have just bought the biography of the Nazi Party's official medium, which is something I don't think people thought, that the Nazis were big into the occult.
Oh yeah,
really
well, I mean,
into cults.
it makes it,
and they had their own
into
personal
movies.
mediums. Yeah, it isn't
like
just
Hellboy.
Yeah.
there were also at that time amid the Nazis, there were these women, and I don't know if it was just specific to Nazism or to Germany at the time, but these women mediums who would grow their hair out very long, and it was considered like sort of the source of their psychic power, that they would have this great like coif, I think it's called, like really really long hair. Do you know anything about this? The long-haired women?
Not especially. I just know, I think that a lot of the beliefs surrounding the kind of the Nazis' interpretation of spiritualism was kind of a bastardized versions of like biblical parables. I think if you see more lines drawn, like hair and strength and things like that, I think a lot of it was drawn from this Aryan rewriting of strength and of virtue. And of course, you know, long hair to a lot of people of that era was seen as kind of the paragon of feminine virtue. So I think there's a lot of mysticism interlink with the parables. Again, there's just so much reinterpretation. Whereas in especially the UK at the same time, there were just as many mediums, just as many working mediums, but they were monitored by the war authorities, but they weren't celebrated or publicly employed by war boards. Whereas, I mean, I suppose the most famous medium in the UK from that era is Helen Duncan, who was the last woman to be she wasn't convicted, but I think she was the last woman to be prosecuted under the Witchcraft Act, as in the 18th century Witchcraft Act. Because at a private seance, Helen Duncan's a very divisive figure. A lot of people today will, swear until their last breath that she was a phenomenally powerful medium, but also she did do a lot with ectoplasm. And when you get into ectoplasm, it's a great love of mine. But it's, especially when you get investigated by bodies such as the SPR, and you run out of investigations when people might realize that you're re-swallowing some cheesecloth, then I think your reputation's a little bit on the wane. But she was at a private seance and gave news of one of the sitters. I think it was her son, could be completely wrong, but it was someone related to one of the sitters who had just died. And basically she gave away information about this battleship that had gone down, and it was not public information. It was only known to the authorities, and this got reported back, and they believed that she could be a spy, that she could be working with the Axis powers, and so the only way that they could really get her away from giving away state secrets was to prosecute her under the Witchcraft Act. So there wasn't that same sort of handy relationship between the two parties. It was very much us, and then let's keep an eye on these people. So that is interesting. I still don't know how how she got that information, because no one knew.
There was, during the 60s, 50s and 60s, the US government looked very sincerely into using psychics and psychic powers as part of their whole military industrial complex that they were building. And there was it's a comedy, but the Men Who Stare at Goats came out a few years ago. Although that's meant that is a comedic movie, there were sincere efforts on the part of the US government to study this. And some of the studies, I mean, it's not all debunked. Some of it is like, hey, we found measurable things that people were able to do, which I think is very interesting, because if you're looking into this is to use it for, the advancement of political causes or weaponry or this kind of a thing, you're going to be very serious about your data taking. And in that vein, they didn't debunk everything. They didn't say, oh, this is a whole lot of hogwash. I think they ever found it reliable enough to use, or at least from the public's perception, we were told they never found anything reliable enough to use. But, even governments around the world looked very seriously into using these people as a means, which I think is interesting.
It is. I think Uri Geller as well, who is, again, people will fall into one of two very distinct camps with him. The famous spoon bender, should we say? He is on several occasions, even in his own work, he's written about how he was tested and investigated by the CIA, I think it was, who reportedly didn't disprove his powers, but like you said, they didn't employ him to do anything, but they certainly tested him. So I do find that interesting. But what were they actually hoping to achieve? What was the end goal? Were they going to just ship out mediums into a war zone and try and figure out what the next plan of attack was? But I think Uri Geller, as much as he is dismissed as, again, being a charlatan or anything like that, I think a lot of what he has gone through, a lot of what is publicized, and for every strange claim, there's something really interesting beneath all of that. Because he's had an amazing life, a really fantastic life, and he's been, debunked by James Randi, the late great James Randi, and then will get a seal of approval from the CIA. So I think it's amazing how these people just swing between camps.
I think one of the tests that I read about involved an egg inside of a glass case that they would have people focus on and try to break the egg. And so that doesn't suggest to me that they were going to use people of this nature for peaceful means.
No.
And so, if anything, I'm glad, I'm hopeful and glad that didn't work out for them.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that what interests me about all of this partially is, like you said, because if you watch, there are a lot of, it seems to come in comic book movies or in Indiana Jones more than anything, but the Nazis and the occult, because it's like if you look at Indiana Jones, they were trying to it was very like Christian centered, so they were like, that's fiction obviously, but they wanted the Ark of the Covenant so that they could use that against their enemies, which is such a bizarre thing when you understand. I don't know, these people trying to do war in the name of God, but also not. Like the Hitlers of the world make zero sense to me, because like, what was his religious standing anyway? Like, some people say Christian, some people say he wasn't, but he was definitely into the occult. It's like this bizarre amalgam of things. Like if you look at Captain America, his main antagonist, at least in the movies, is Red Skull, who was a part of Hydra, which was the occult part of the Nazi party and the Nazi war machine. And I'm like, how much of this is overblown and how much of it is true that they were into this kind of spiritual occult stuff? Because it does seem like the government, regardless of what side you're on, is dipping into this in ways I didn't realize. I didn't know about the eggs, like what were they doing? What is it about trying to find mystical powers? Because you'd think that if anything, they would want people not to look into this, because it would kind of threaten their own power, as it were.
So I think the idea was they thought the Russians were doing it. So they said, if the Russians are doing it, we better do it too. a lot of things in this world have developed as a result of paranoia of the Russians. Yeah. Which, Russia has like the GDP of a state, like a single one of our states. So, like, but yeah, let's make sure that if the Russians have a psychic army, that we have a psychic army too. So, but the thing about that is, like, if they did develop that, they wouldn't tell anyone. So it's like, yeah, we got told that, oh, okay, yeah, we found out that this wasn't really worth our time. That's what we got told. But if you had a psychic army, why would you tell anyone about that? You wouldn't. So I have that little suspension of disbelief that, like, I don't know, maybe they did come up with something. They certainly didn't disprove everything. And that's very interesting.
So, spiritualism. So it started with some little girls who were knocking on walls, and then
they
it
weren't
took
knocking
over.
on walls, but
What were they knocking on?
It sounded like they were knocking on walls. I wish they were knocking on walls, but when they made knocking noises, it was firstly they used an apple on the end of a string. They confessed this many years later when they were about to be quite destitute, and some of them became very reliant on alcohol. It's a very public confession in the newspaper and then in a hall in New York. It was very dramatic. But firstly, they'd use an apple on the end of the string under the floorboards and pull it up, and apparently sometimes the noises were so loud it sounded like someone was moving furniture. So this wasn't just little taps. But most commonly when they gave their demonstrations, they clicked their toe joints. And it was that snapping of the toe joint that was, I know, that's why I was hoping that they were knocking on walls instead. But those knocks of toe joints were so loud that they would echo around concert halls. They were, and some say that they were able to do these knocks regardless of the situation, but many more sources say that when the girls' feet were placed on a cushion, then they couldn't produce the same raps. So, I mean, my main concern would be, I bet they suffered with really bad arthritic joints from doing that all the time. But that was how they did it. Really, again, it's like, so many people still believe in the Fox sisters, but when they demonstrated later how they did it, it's a bit.
Wait, do people still believe in them even though they said they? Why?
Well, I suppose it's like so many famous mediums, and like the aforementioned very famous ghost hunter. I think I know which one you're on about. That you can argue that we needed results. Like there's a famous medium in the 60s and 70s called Doris Stokes in the UK, and if you're doing big arenas, big readings all the time, and you're not getting, the spirits aren't talking. Let's just take it that these people are legitimate and they have powers. So if the spirits aren't talking to you, and you have a room of 2,000 people who have all paid to have messages, very few people would have the resolve or the financial ability to then say to these people, I'm so sorry, I'm getting nothing. You're all going to have to go home. Or if you're being filmed, plenty do say they do. If nothing happens, we'll be honest, but many more will be under contracts or under a kind of perceived pressure to produce results, when it's just not going to happen. So I think if someone confesses to fraud once and then says, no, but the rest of it was legitimate, that's when it casts their whole career into kind of a sense of scrutiny. And I think that's really what happens with most mediums. The argument is, okay, yeah, they confessed to this or they faked this, but the rest of it was real. And that's, I think that's kind of a long-standing problem with spiritualism, especially when it's performance-based and when we're looking into personal gain. But the Fox sisters are still revered. I mean, the original Fox sisters house in Hydesville was removed God, when was it removed? In the late 19th century, and taken to the commune of Lilydale, the spiritualist commune, and rebuilt there, and was almost like a shrine for a few decades until I think it burned down in the 40s or 50s. Because it was wood and America, so everything seems to burn down at one point. But yeah, they're still revered. A lot of big mediums that have very questionable pasts are still still beloved.
Right. I think people don't want to lose that connection to the idea that there is an afterlife, and they can't find it through traditional religious means, so they convince themselves of the authenticity of these spiritual people, and say spiritualist people, and say, this is proof, this is what I need. So it's very personal too. It's like we were talking about earlier, a lot of people who succumb to this thinking have lost children or a loved one or something of that nature. And there is also, like cold reading, people who are able to determine through, your expressions and your responses to certain answers, they can very easily lead you to tell them what you are wanting to hear from them. Much to my great shame, in my early 20s, I did tarot card readings in this exact fashion. I didn't have any, I barely knew how to read the cards or what the symbolism behind the cards was, but the people who would want readings from me for them would lead me through, just my ability to perceive what they wanted to hear would lead me through the path of what they wanted to be told during the reading. And while I never claimed to be able to speak for the dead or anything like that, I could see how someone who was skilled in this could get it all from your expression, get it all from your eyes, exactly what you wanted your dear departed aunt to tell you. And I paid my rent a couple of times doing that, but my thinking to myself while I was doing it was, well, they're paying for an experience. I'm giving them a show. I'm giving them a little experience. And so that was kind of the way morally I made it make sense to myself was, they're paying for this little experience. The reason I quit doing it is because a kid who was maybe 11 or 12 years old asked me to do a reading for her, and I felt terrible that it could influence the direction of the rest of this girl's life if I told her one thing or another the wrong way. So I gave her a very truncated 3-card little, just do your best and, try to be true to yourself, and just give her what I thought would be good life advice. And then I never did it again because I said, oh God, what if something I said to someone could send them down a path to their ultimate destruction? And there are a lot of people without scruples who will, take money from grieving people and things of this nature. So my interest in it always came from a very skeptical side, just kind of I knew what I was doing, so I felt they knew what they were doing too. And I do, however, think it's very interesting in some cases there does seem to be this nugget of truth that you couldn't pick up from just looking at someone's face. You'd have no way to know these things. And maybe you know his name. I can't recall it off the top of my head, but there used to be this physician who would go into trances, and he would determine what was medically wrong with people. He was able to, I don't know if you remember his name or not.
Several. It was a psychic surgery, and that was a whole movement. I mean, I think the first guy that really did it was Mesmer in the 18th century. He kind of popularized the idea that if you transcended your mental state, then you'd be able to diagnose people. And he had it was like a housemaid. It was quite a young housemaid who he put into one of his mesmeric sleep. It was a trance. And she was supposedly taken over by the spirit of a German physician, and would speak in a German voice, a German accent, and would diagnose people. So it was it's a long-standing. I think she did try and treat them as well, but even then they pulled her back and said, "Stay away from the scalpel." But yeah, it's a long-standing tradition, definitely.
So like, let me cut this guy. No.
Yeah. Please don't.
Have you watched the second Conjuring movie?
Yes. Is that the Enfield?
Enfield.
The Enfield
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
I watched that because I watched 113 horror movies recently for no good reason. Did I mute for a second there?
No, you're there. You blew out for a second, but you came back.
So I watched that one, and what I found fascinating about that movie was that, the little girl spoke in this man's voice, and you're watching a movie, so you're like, it didn't really sound like this. This is just a guy talking, and then they played the actual audio.
Yeah.
That
it's
sounded
sinister,
like a
isn't
man.
It? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was obsessed with the Enfield haunting growing up, and there's a lot of parallels with the Fox sisters, because the two girls from the Enfield haunting were from the real Enfield poltergeist were 11 and 14, and the Fox sisters that started spiritualism were also 11 and 14 as well. So I think it's just one of those fun little coincidences. But Enfield's fascinating. But again, they were caught out faking evidence at one time, and they said it's because you wanted it. You wanted this evidence, and the house wasn't giving it to you, so we gave it to you. And so that's when you're left with this kind of horrible choice of, okay, does that discredit everything? Or so I can see the problem from the extreme skeptical side and the extreme believers side as well. I think Enfield is a fantastic example of contemporary ghost hunting and contemporary sort of spiritual belief, because it was only in the 70s, so it wasn't that long ago.
Well, and it was interesting how they played that part, because someone had caught it on video. They'd set up a video camera, and she had faked this encounter where she threw over a table and stuff like that. And in the movie, the way it was explained was that, yes, they did it because they needed to see it, but that what they were saying was that the demon, essentially, or inhuman spirit, I don't know why they don't just say demon, had essentially told this little girl that if she didn't make it look fake, then she would hurt her family. Or the demon would hurt her family. And so that was why they faked it, so that they could see it. I mean, it was a very, like, I'd never looked into the Enfield poltergeist before, but I remember, and then I looked up that recording separately, and it could have been just another dude. It's only audio, some dude talking. But if that was really coming out of that little girl's mouth, holy cow.
Yeah, the spirit of Bill, wasn't it?
Yeah.
There's a mini-series, I think it was a Sky mini-series a few years ago, just called The Enfield Haunting, with Timothy Spall. And it's only about a 3-4-parter. But if you want to just watch a dramatization of it, that I think is a fantastic, really fantastic interpretation of the Enfield haunting. It's fab.
So you have studied the Victorian era and their literature. You've studied the spiritualism. Have you ever, I'm not going to just assume the goth aesthetic means that you also do seances. Have you ever taken part in any of the spiritualist practices or gone into that?
I do ghost hunting, although now we're supposed to call it paranormal investigation. But that implies that I know anything about science. And as we have clearly discerned, that's a hot no. So yeah, I've started, was it a couple of years ago? I started doing talks on spiritualism and kind of how they did it, how seances were done. And it's mainly because I can't take anything seriously. Like, even if it's something I love, if there's not a laugh in the middle of it, I get a bit itchy. And so I started doing talks on seance and spiritualism, and would recreate elements of seance, especially ectoplasm. Because, if you're having a very dry talk and then you want to wake everyone up a bit, choke back a bit of cheesecloth and bring out, you know, a rubber glove on a fake arm, you've got everyone back in the room, and also it's historically accurate. So
Right.
I did start creating ectoplasmic hands. Spirit hands in particular had a real spike in popularity in the 19th and 20th centuries. I kind of got a bit obsessed in a sense of, this is hilarious. Why doesn't everyone know about this? And there were two mediums, Helen Duncan again, and a medium called Mina Crandon, and they both had spirit hands. So I started off by, I would describe Mina Crandon's. I never made it because it makes me feel a bit queasy.
Spirit hands.
So when they were,
I need to Google it.
when they were doing seances, I wrote this ridiculously long article about it for Haunted magazine a while ago. So track down that issue. It should be free online now, I think. Yeah, they, during seances, instead of just like ectoplasmic froth, they would manifest spirit hands. Some mediums had like wax casts made of the hand that were then, they're still held up now by the Spiritualist National Union and the Arthur Findlay College, which is a psychic college in the UK. That these wax casts could not have been made by human hands because the hand had to dematerialize to leave the cast. So there's that. But Helen Duncan's spirit hand, which is one of my favorite spiritualist images, is literally a rubber glove on a fake arm. And so amazing. That's proof of the afterlife. Well done. And Mina Crandon's was a piece of carved animal liver. So it's just this little bit of offal that's been chopped into finger bits. And that was, yeah, I won't tell you where it was stored, but you can imagine.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that in spiritualism, but I'll save that for another day. But with... oh, yes. As Eva Carrier, she hid a lot. And Einar Nielsen, who was a Danish medium. Bit of storage for the ghosties around the back. But anyway, seance. Yes, I have done seances. I'm terribly sorry I derailed that.
No, you're good. This is information that I didn't need to know, but I needed to know.
Exactly. It might come up in a quiz one day and you'll go, yes, I remember.
You learn
the horrors.
You learn something new every day, even if you don't want to.
But no, I started then doing Victorian seances with none of the aforementioned techniques. These were just very above board, you know, like calling out, using things like slates, slate writing, bells, tambourines, very tactile seance methods that aren't especially used today, because the only things we really see in contemporary ghost hunting that are distinctly Victorian are things like the crying out, knock once for yes, twice for no, whistling, bit of Ouija boards, because everyone nowadays has at least 7 Ouija boards in the house, it seems. You can't escape them.
Did you ever get rid of yours, Jessica?
No, it's still up in my closet. I have a game closet in this room, actually. I have one. I don't know what to do with it.
It's fine. Use it as a chopping board if you
need
something new.
Put a little extra spice.
Yeah, I've got a cheese board that's a Ouija board as well, actually. So she'll get some extra goth points for that, perhaps.
Yeah, we when I was in my early 20s, we had like a seance party, and that's what I bought it for. So we used it once, we did the party, nothing happened, and then I put it up in the closet and kind of forgot about it.
Silently frustrated with her dog.
Yeah, but no, I do quite a lot of ghost hunting nowadays. I have done for quite a long time, actually.
Have you done it at Enfield?
No, it's private house. The closest you can get to the Enfield house is a house called 30 East Drive in Pontefract, which is kind of, should we say, the location of the film When the Lights Went Out. And the producer of the film now owns the house, and paranormal groups, ghost hunters from around the country rent it out. So many ghost hunting shows go there and rent it out for the night, and supposedly it's haunted by the spirit of a monk called, is it Father Michael or Fred, depending on who you ask. And that's very, very popular, but sadly not yet, haven't been to Enfield, but I'm sure I think it's still a council house. I think it might be.
Yeah.
So if it's ever sold off, someone's going to make some cash from that one.
There's a murder house in Illinois or Indiana, Herb Baumeister, and he was prolific in like the early 90s and 80s, and he killed something like 30 men. I mean, awful serial killer who eventually killed himself on a beachside. But his property, no one will maintain ownership of it because apparently it's extremely haunted, and it's selling for extremely cheap in an overblown retail or home market right now. And my husband won't open a haunted B&B with me in Indiana at the Herb Baumeister murder house, which I think is extremely terrible because
it's very disappointing.
Make a killing. I mean, yeah, people don't want to live in a murder house, but if they pay, like so many people pay for these like haunting experiences, they'll pay to stay in a haunted place, especially if you serve them breakfast in the morning. Like,
exactly.
Somebody needs to get on this idea.
You could serve them spirit hands.
I see I see a picture of this one that this woman kept in her hoo-hoo, and it's awful. But so you do the paranormal investigation. Do you have any experiences that you feel like defy reason and weren't, matters of suggestion? Because I know when you're in that environment, it's the feeling is very much there. And even someone like myself who's extremely skeptical, when I'm in those environments, I'm a believer, because like if something knocks on the wall near me, I'm out of there. Like I'm not going to wait around and investigate. Do you have things that sort of defy reason that you'd be willing to share with us?
Yeah, I think last time I told you about I might have
Barking
done
dog.
my my ghost dog.
Right.
But also the dog at my sister's house, that was like what started my interest in the paranormal, was that
right.
I'll quite happily say my sister's house, not where she is now, this was quite a few years ago, was haunted. And I will go to my grave saying 100% that was haunted. Fight me, it was. And I think I go into ghost hunts with a very high level of skepticism, maybe too much, because I think what other people get from it is something that I don't let myself get, because I'm always thinking, like I'm overthinking, oh, is that like especially with EVPs, thing like that, is it auditory pareidolia? I think because my first paranormal experiences happened to such a high level, they were quite grand. I saw a figure in my bedroom at the time at my sister's house, and we used to hear the footsteps. That was the main thing that I've never been able to explain. I think you can explain away seeing shadow figures and hearing sort of breath, because I felt and heard breath next to me one night. But the thing that I can never explain is that my sister's dog used to sit at the top of the stairs and used to watch as something came up the stairs and across the landing, and it was proper hard footsteps doing the same route every night, and the dog would watch. So it wasn't just I'm hearing footsteps, it was I'm hearing footsteps, I can't see anything, the dog is watching something. And that I've never been able to explain. My sister had some really horrible experiences there as well, like being pushed and things being thrown around. So that kind of cemented okay, I can't explain this. It's both scary and it's kind of
exhilarating.
It is, in a sense. There's like a resolve in you that's like, oh, okay, that there is something more. I want more answers now. So I think when people go out searching for paranormal experiences, even if they manage to shake hands with a ghost and sit down and have a cup of tea, it would never be enough, because you're still searching for that proof, for someone to come down and say, right, big tick, we're real. I think, things like, I really like EVPs. I think, like you say, it's very easy to get bad ones if you're using a little dictaphone. And when you try and enhance it, and then a little crackle sounds like, leave.
Yeah.
Because you've over filtered it. But we've had some EVPs that were in former religious buildings that were directly related to the location. So I'm quite fortunate that I know a lot of people who are really into recreating things like Singapore studies, where you try and create atmospheres that replicate how the place once was. So if it's a place that once was associated with like an abbey or something, with full permission, I would never encourage anyone to ever go investigating anywhere that's religious or a place of rest without permission. But yeah, we played Latin masses, we spoke in Latin, and we got some EVPs that were directly related, words directly related to Catholic worship, that weren't just,
like the responses. You would say things liturgically, and then they would respond. Yeah. That's
so it wasn't just usual get out, I am a woman. It was very clearly linked, and I think they're the sort of things that you literally cannot explain away through a kind of auditory pareidolia. And that's when you don't have to do anything. When it's best to use, like a higher end multi-directional dictaphone, so you're not spending your whole evening sifting through crackling sludge because someone's left the kettle on in the next room and it sounds like a demon. But even so, it's still fun. It's still fun. I think even when you're not answering questions of eternity, there's a lot of fun to be had from maybe seeing a shadow figure at the end of a room, which I did at an old schoolhouse a few weeks ago. Saw a child-sized shadow figure across a room, which I can't explain because I was well rested for once and hadn't had a drink. So that I can't quite explain. But they're the nice things that keep you going for the next one. But yeah, the religious ones were best.
Because of my interest in ghost stories, I've heard a lot of them, and whenever someone has one, I'm eager to hear it. And I get a feeling from some of them, like just, I don't know, the hairs on the back of your head will raise up, and you're just kind of like, okay, that's a real ghost story. And then other ones, it's like flatline. And I've kind of used my own like barometer on that one. And when you were telling me about the dog, I got the feeling about that. I was like, oh, that's not something I'd want to experience necessarily. So I do hold out that level of suspension of disbelief. That there are things in the world that can't be explained by science, things that we haven't come to fully understand yet. So while I am skeptical of things of this nature, which I think is healthy to be, you should have that almost an over skepticism. Like if you're going to show me this, like really show it to me. But it does, there is a point where you're like extreme about it. You're not willing to like let the idea that perhaps there could be something on the other side, that there is a veil between worlds that isn't always as thick in certain places.
Yeah.
And I do hold out that kind of, I don't know if it's a hope or not, but just the suspension of my disbelief that there could be other things out there. And so I'm not totally discounting of it. I do know that sometimes when I'm listening to EVP recordings, the people who record them will suggest to you what they say, which I don't like because I think it places the idea of in your head what this is. And I've heard quite distinctly different things that I thought were even more related to especially the Herb Baumeister house is something that the one that I want to buy and turn into a B&B. There have been a lot of EVP recordings taken there. And when I've listened to some of them, I hear things being said that are directly related to the cases that the investigator heard as something completely different and unrelated. I was like, how did you not pick up on this guy is like saying one of them specifically, what I hear in the recording is Herb is dead. And they said that he's saying something like, how dare you? And I'm like, how could you not hear? He literally said the name Herb. I never know how to say that name, but like, so yeah, I don't like it when the investigator suggests to you what's being said, because it does like implant. Yeah.
Let me ask, we're American, you're British. In your studies of spiritualism, what do you think are kind of standout differences between the way Americans saw and did things versus the way the English did?
Good question.
Because I mean, I know my people, but I don't know yours. However, let me just say this, and this is completely off topic. One of my favorite, you guys have a lot of panel shows over there in England.
Oh yeah.
And I have to tell you that Lee Mack and David Mitchell on Would I Lie to You?
Yeah.
I love that. I can't think of a whole lot of stuff that I watch that's English, but if you haven't watched Would I Lie to You, like Lee Mack is like my dude.
Did you ever see Lee Mack's
to put that
sitcom?
out there. I have not seen a sitcom.
Just
watched him on that.
No. You need to get Not Going Out. This is there's a ghost in it. There is. There you are. It's related. One of the Christmas specials quite late on. But Not Going Out. Get the first 5 series are hilarious.
I love him.
Yeah.
I love
Get
that
on
guy.
that. That's you sorted. I promise you. You'll love it.
Sorry for derailing. So what do you think? Were there any differences that you've noticed between how Americans approached it versus the British?
Yeah, I think in the same ways that you could say about cross-continental differences today, I think there's a lot of the big American mediums of the time, especially the big female American mediums like Cora Scott. They were trance mediums who filled enormous halls with speeches that were supposedly dictated via kind of spiritual knowledge. So they would be these very long lectures, mainly on matters of kind of religious fervor. And I think that's something that's distinctly American in spiritualism. Not that it didn't exist in the UK, but definitely the high level of religious Christian, obviously, obsession and reiteration. Because with people like Nettie Coburn Maynard, who was she even wrote a book called Was Abraham Lincoln a Spiritualist, which was kind of her memoirs with him. Especially people like Cora Scott, they not only did these incredibly long, rapturous, even like their lexis, the whole syntax of it was so overtly passionate and religious, and we didn't really have it to the same degree in the UK. It could be just as wild, but a lot of it was more personal. Whereas a lot of the Americans were really Jesus focused, and several American mediums, when they would channel different spirits, can't speak that T strong, they would channel different spirits, and many would channel supposedly Jesus, and so they fell into this kind of umbrella of spiritualistic kind of religious fervor, where they would argue that Christ was the first medium. And so spiritualism was the most inherently godly and the most right and the most righteous religion, because they are literally following in Christ's form, as it were. Because when mediums and spirits would manifest, it was seen as a kind of legitimizing the appearances of Christ after he rose from the dead. So it was seen that spiritualism could explain away all the difficulties that these modern minds were having with the story of the resurrection.
Interesting.
Because if it wasn't real, then how can we replicate it today with these godly gifts? So it kind of pathologized in a way, and made the resurrection kind of scientifically sound to the world at large. And that was a distinctly, I think, mainly an American thing. It was, across the world, many mediums would have quite profound religious experiences, and Jesus was a common figure. But especially with the resurgence of interest in Christ's appearances after the resurrection, kind of found its feet in America, which I found really interesting.
That's
Yeah.
bizarre. Like I never thought that they were channeling Jesus. I thought it was that is I feel like I'd probably have to fight someone if they tried that and then did it wrong.
I mean, yeah, pick an apostle. Don't go
Right.
straight in. But,
Right.
Right.
No, many did, and obviously many people channeled apostles, and but yeah, Jesus was a common figure at the seance table. Yeah.
Wow.
It does lend you a certain authority when you're saying that you're channeling the literal Son of God. It lends a bit of that authority to you in that way too. So it does make sense to me that people would, if you're going to do it, go big or go home, which
Exactly.
is an American, definitely American.
Yeah. Yeah, you're channeling your dead neighbor, Son of God.
I don't know if I mentioned.
You can't.
I know I've mentioned this before on the show. I don't think I did it with you, but there is a man out there. I want to say his name is Wiley Brooks, who calls himself a breatharian and claims that he only breathes. He doesn't eat or drink. He doesn't need these. He eats fifth dimensional food. And that fifth dimensional food happens to be a double quarter pounder with cheese and a Diet Coke from McDonald's. Not joking. This is on his website.
Amazing.
But what's funny about this, and what made me think of him, was the fact that somehow in his reincarnation cycles, he was both John the Baptist and Jesus Christ at the same time.
Now there's a talent.
Yeah, I mean, talk about it's really the opposite of channeling, I guess, because you're inserting yourself into other people. That's a weird way to put that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But yeah, it made me think of that because it's I get what's interesting though is I think that probably one of the best treatments on the Christian understanding of resurrection and of Jesus's resurrection was written by N.T. Wright, who is in England. I don't know what part. Probably the main, wherever the Church of England.
Main part.
The main part.
The middle. Birmingham.
But not. I don't know where that church is that he's in. But he probably did the best work on resurrection. And it's so funny because I'm reading that, and then I'm hearing you talk about people trying to use this spiritualism and to channel Jesus to justify this, and I'm like, it's wild where we are now. I'm so happy that that's not what we're doing anymore. Just seems like a bad idea to me.
Yeah, I think channeling religious figures definitely waned in popularity. I don't think many people have done it in the 20th century, at least. There was I recently wrote a article for 14 Times because I got quite. It's just going to be a series of Kate's obsessions through the years. I got really interested, should we say, in psychic interactions with Elvis. Because I think in many ways, Elvis is kind of a secular modern day cultural deity. We see he represents so much, especially the American dream. He really is across the world this kind of representation of idealized Americana. And so I started looking into seances with Elvis that had been preserved. That had been recorded.
Video or audio?
Audio. I found 2 that were on audio. If anyone wants to read any more about it, go onto my Patreon. I'm doing a full Elvis series.
I am a patron.
You are. I'm very grateful for it.
But no, I'll be honest with you. The reason we're talking is because I'm very curious about what you're obsessed about. So go into whatever it is. I'm happy to hear whatever it is that's piquing your interest.
Yeah, it's there's a book called Elvis Afterlife as well, which is long out of print. That came out in the early 80s, I think. And it was kind of like a list book. It was a very small paperback of people's interactions with the ghost of Elvis, either just before he died, like before they got the news, or after he died, and what he, psychologically speaking, it's a fascinating read because you see what Elvis had come to represent for so many people. So for one couple, this guy sort of zoned out and fell asleep on a beach with his girlfriend, and they weren't working things out. And he had this kind of transcendental experience, kind of religious experience, where he met Elvis, and Elvis sort of guided him back together, and now they're married and they have 500 children and all the rest of it. And there's other instances where people were desperately unhappy in their jobs, and Elvis came into their office, or they saw Elvis from afar and he looked sad. You know, there's some are really little and some are really profound experiences with this representation of Elvis, who kind of became Christ-like for a lot of these people. But at the same time, he's a very throwaway pop cultural figure. So there are minimum of two, I managed to find two, seances with Elvis that were committed to vinyl. And one was an American one, which is like the Elvis Presley Seance. It's called the Elvis. One is a seance. Yeah, one is a seance with Elvis Presley, really poorly named. And the other one, which I've got framed on my wall because I'm that girl, is the Elvis Presley Seance, which absolutely fascinates me because it's a strange collective of people. And this is a British one. And famously, Elvis never performed in Britain. He never came over here. And this is a seance with Elvis, I think it was 2 years after he died.
Wow.
At a church hall just outside of London, in a place called Watford. And it's the most hilariously awkward listen. It's very Alan Partridge, if you've watched any of that series. It's amazing. It's like the medium doesn't want to be there and is so dismissive. And she immediately clicks in, yeah, Elvis is here. And then halfway through, she'll go, oh, God, he's crying now. Oh, that's not making things easy at all, is it? As if like he just wants to reach to the ether and bell Elvis, going, stop crying. And they
Americans ruining her time.
Yeah, it's like, come on now. I'm on double time for this. I should be home watching the telly. It's amazing. And they've got a woman there from the Elvis Presley UK fan club. And she's amazing. She went to the States to see Elvis like 40 times.
Wow.
And they're all interviewed by this radio DJ. I don't know how he was a DJ because he is so insulting. He calls the Elvis fan a freak. He describes everything so unflatteringly. And, you know, they can ask Elvis, he's the spirit, he's there, they can ask him whatever they want. They're big fans. And she asks, this woman from the fan club asks, what type of magazines does Elvis like to read? And this, you can ask the king of rock and roll any questions, and you ask him about magazines. And Elvis's answer, I'm not much of a reader.
Yeah,
So profound. It's amazing. It's the most awkward, painful 40 minutes.
It sounds wonderful.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
It's madness. So I did a video not long ago where I put my makeup on while discussing the Elvis Presley seance, and it was a lot. It went down really well, but it's so bizarre that it's one of my favorite things, and I urge everyone to listen to it because it shouldn't exist. I think they pressed 5,000 copies of this vinyl.
Oh wow!
You know, really thinking this is going to be a big money spinner. You could find it in bargain bins for years afterwards, but it is one of the most amazing seances I think I've ever heard of. So I love that.
Everything about Elvis's repose is like just draped in absurdity. So this kind of goes along with it. Like, I don't know if you guys remember me last time talking about Elvis's gravesite being just like awful and ghoulish and absurd, and like the idea that even after he died, people would just not leave him alone. Oh, no. It's kind of great.
Yeah, he's been very busy. He's been very, very busy, you know.
But he
never came, not reading, he hasn't got that much time. Yeah. I mean, he never came to England in life, so obviously he's going to come to the dizzying, glittering heights of Watford in like the middle of winter. It's like, it's the Harry Potter experience is there now, but God, it's just no one goes to Watford, least of all Elvis.
I would hope that when they built the Harry Potter situation there, that they would have a room with Elvis Presley not reading magazines.
Yeah. Yeah. Or just to be
just
obtuse.
shooting the TV over and over again.
Him with the complete works of Shakespeare going, see, I told you I would, you know.
Man, the 70s were a wild time. This took place in the 70s. When did he die? 19...
Was it 76?
Yeah, so still in the 70s. Yeah, the
78?
70s were, there was a lot of spiritual stuff that was just like hokum, but like a lot of fun if you're looking at it from the outside. Just all the weird little groups and cults and things that people came up with through the 60s and 70s is quite a lot of fun. So I'm glad this exists. It shouldn't exist, you're right, but I'm glad that it does.
Oh, me too.
Imagine being in the afterlife and suddenly you're dead on the toilet as you died, and you have to get off the toilet to go and answer a woman who asks you what your favorite magazine is. Like that
welcome
seems...
to eternity. Yeah.
And it's so funny when you were saying, and the DJ was very rude. I was like, it sounds right up my alley, number one. And two, it also sounds very British to me.
Oh, painfully. It could not have happened anywhere else. It's yeah.
So last time near the end of the show, we asked you our question about hope and what's giving you hope, and you talked about your puppy.
Yes.
And so since we're nearing the end of our conversation, I would like to extend that question. Besides, not feeling well, I know that you didn't feel well. That's why you had to. We had to reschedule this. But beyond the not feeling well, is there anything right now that's giving you hope and motivation? I mean, you finished your doctorate. You got now you're waiting on graduation. But what's making you still make videos and put in articles? Like what's pushing you on?
Still the dog. We're still going to say
still the dog,
and but also friendship. I think it's such a very glib sort of Miss America hands around the world sort of thing to say. But I haven't been very well recently, and it's been going on for quite a few months. And I think it's very, very easy to feel incredibly isolated and incredibly lonely, especially when you've got so much work on and so forth. Yeah. But having little pockets of people just checking in or saying, do you want to look around I went, for coffee and to look around some junk shops with my friend Porridge the other day. And it was those little people checking in wherever they are. I have a friend called Porridge because, of course,
I love it. No, I love it.
And it's people checking in just from, around the world, around the country. I think realizing that you're never actually alone, and there's always someone who'll just want to talk about dead Elvis for a few minutes. That I think always gives me hope that there's always something silly around the corner. Not everything has to be this big overblown statement. People are inherently good, and they'll pick you up even when you keep falling down. I think that kind of gives me hope, definitely, at the minute. And my fluffy dog, who is lovely, even when she kicks me in the head in the morning. It's in a cute way, so she can get away with it.
Well, you have quite a little dog, right?
She's the size of about a loaf of bread.
Right.
She's like a Paris Hilton dog, but cuter.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think that I had a friend in high school who we called Sausage. And so my friend Sausage and your friend Porridge should meet so that someone can have a balanced breakfast.
Exactly. Absolutely. There could be a crime fighting team. It would be amazing.
American Sausage comes over to help Porridge fight the...
Yeah, we should hook them up. That'd be good.
Wow.
It'd be the new Marvel universe.
It's the Mad Ones universe of superheroes, and they're the most ridiculously named characters. Like, what kind of powers would Porridge have?
The power of bafflement, I think. Definitely.
Excellent. Very, very powerful bafflement. It stops me in my tracks several times a day. So.
Also, he shoots hot porridge out of his hands. I mean, there has to be something as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to happen. I don't know what Sausage is going to be, but it sounds horrifying. So let's not dig too far into
No.
sausages.
Yeah, don't
or
tell him too
origin
much about
story.
spirit hands. He'll start getting ideas.
No.
Yeah.
Just a cursory Google search. I've already seen too much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. Keep that in my
So
heart.
we do really appreciate you coming on and becoming, across the pond friends with
Oh,
us.
thank you.
If you ever want for me to say something funny, I can't. I'm not a funny person, but you can always message me, and I'll talk about dead Elvis for 10 minutes if that
Oh,
helps.
thank you. I appreciate that.
But we thank you for coming on. You're a very I found that every time I talk about you, I call you lovely. And it's just because you're such and it's not just like, oh, well, she's a looker. I'm just literally saying you're just such a lovely person to talk to. And I
thank you.
very much appreciate conversation.
I
with you.
agree.
So thank you for
Thank you.
coming
So are
on.
you too. Wonderful.
So I'll tell people where to find you. You've got your project, Burials and Beyond, that can be found at burialsandbeyond.com. If you want the real stuff, you got to go to Patreon, though. So patreon.com/burialsandbeyond. It's not expensive. It may be the least expensive Patreon I've ever come across. It's a lot of people have like a dollar
Yeah.
thing. I mean, it amounts to more because she's using pounds like some kind of British person. I have to figure out how much that actually is going to be. But it's most places it's like $1 and you get like barely anything. You just kind of get in and get a couple things.
Yeah.
But you open up your entire world for I think it's $1.50.
Yeah. And I post 4 things a week.
Yes.
And I just want people to see it and have a community. It's not about I don't want to rinse people. I just want people to get involved and make a little clubhouse.
Yeah.
You may be the first person involved in spiritualism who's not trying to rinse the masses. So kudos to you for that.
Thank you.
But beyond that, you're also on Twitter. So if anyone wants to send you a tweet or ask you about dead Elvis, at Burials Beyond. Anything else you want to point people to or anything like that?
You can find me on Facebook and Instagram as well under Burials and Beyond. And if you want to look at anything I've written recently, I have been in 14 Times, Haunted Magazine, and the Feminine Macabre.
That sounds like an interesting magazine.
Yeah, it's a collection of essays on the paranormal, and I've written about the demon church. And there's a lot of fun. So it's Feminine Macabre Volume 2. So once you get hooked into any of my social media, I won't leave you alone. It's relentless.
It's good stuff though. I love because you're actually the only person on Patreon that I am a patron of at this point. And so it's just my posts and my posts and your posts as I'm looking through it. So I'm like, I like both of these people.
Yay.
So with that, we will let you go and we'll go through all of our stuff. It's so funny because like I told you, we're pre-recording all of our December episodes. And so I get so confused in telling people what's coming up because it's like, the next week we finish up most of the episodes. And so it's like going back and forth between like the end of December and then now. And so I'm like, okay, what are we doing next?
This is a November episode.
This is a today episode. But I'll let you go. I appreciate you. Anything you ever want to talk about, if you hit some point of interest that you're like, I'd like to talk about this, and you don't have a speaking engagement for it, and you want to practice on someone, we're here for that. We want to hear it.
We can do a whole episode on Elvis seances. I am so into that.
I will prepare slides. It'll be amazing. Yeah.
Yes. I love it. Yeah.
So with that, I'll pull you off. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Have a great day. And for the rest of you unwashed masses, you dirty people. I shouldn't be mean to the audience. I'm starting to sound like that DJ that Kate
Why
was
not?
talking
You're
about.
mean to me. Be mean to them too.
That's the thing. I'm self-deprecating and mean. I think you can only be mean if you're also mean to yourself. Like those are the rules. Because if you're just mean to other people, you're just kind of a dick. So let me tell you what's coming up. Next week, we have Shannon Ainsley, who is the coach of the Norwegian surf team. I'm pretty sure, but he was also attacked by 2 great white sharks at the same time, and that's really what we're going to talk to him about. I'm so interested in hearing him tell his story, because that's wild. After that, we have Troy Frazier from Revive Studios coming on to talk to us about the real St. Nicholas and where the saintly start of Santa Claus, where that came from, what it stems from, should be pretty good. After that, we're talking to Cody Cook, and we're going to talk to Cody about the nativity, the incarnation of Jesus, and how that actually butted against the Semitic idea of the Nephilim. In the really, it wasn't the Jews themselves, it was the surrounding areas who had these beliefs in the Nephilim and what they did and the overturning of that. We've already had that conversation, so I can tell you it's good. We also talked about women in the church, which is apparently, surprisingly, a point of passion for me.
Always an interesting topic.
And then after that, we have our Christmas party. It's just going to be me and Jessica hanging out, probably reading
sailing.
Yeah. I'm not going to sing for you unless you ask nicely. But we're going to have fun.
If we drink enough, we'll sing.
And so everyone knows, anyone who's watching this now is a patron. Anyone who wants to be a part of the Christmas party and any of the other episodes that are coming up for December, wants to see them early, interact with us during the recording, get on Patreon now. They're the only people who get to do that. So patreon.com/themadOnes. Beyond that, I told you about the coffee, rymcoffee.com, promo code the Mad Ones. I told you about the beef jerky, righteousfelon.com, promo code Mad Ones. We're also on Rockfin. We're on Odyssey. If you're listening and not watching, if you'd like to watch it, typically we're live, and we will do a replay where we're in the chat for the ones that aren't live. So you'll be able to interact with us there. YouTube.com/themadOnes. If you want a shirt, go to wearethemadOnes.com/store. I'm just uploaded. They're not approved yet, but I just uploaded all of our Christmas shirts. So check those out. And if you want a mug, I'm working on our merch situation right now. But if you go to themadoneshop.etsy.com, you can buy one of our mugs, which I think are really good looking. And later on today, I'm going to be loading the Christmas logos onto some mugs as well. So there are going to be several new ones. Check that out. Beyond that, I don't think I'm missing anything. Oh, on Twitter, I'm at Cam Harless. Jessica is at SoupCanarchist. And so with that, I think we're done. I think we hit everything.
That's it. We hit it all.
Dear, wonderful, beautiful, ugly listeners, thank you for watching the show. And as always, you have a chance to be a light in the world. So go light it up.